a very warm welcome to the very first episode of CTR TV, a series of online interviews with interesting people, parishioners, and otherwise. And a very warm welcome to Dr. Dave Williscroft, our first guest and a parishioner here at Christ the Redeemer. Now, since the pandemic began, we have been praying, and I get very emotional when I talk about it. We've been praying for our doctors, nurses, other healthcare providers, and caregivers during the pandemic. So we've been praying for Dave. He says I gave him a blessing at the very beginning that has stood him in good stead so far. So I'm very happy about that. Dave is an emergency room physician at our local hospital, Lionsgate. He's also palliative care physician at St. Paul's Hospital. So he's very much seen what's going on right now in the world, and he has, I'm sure, a few stories to tell us, and we are very, very honored that he'd take the time to be with us. Thanks, Dave, very much.
Thank you.
So, Dave, before we get into the really challenging and interesting questions of what you've been up to during these tumultuous weeks, I have a personal, simple question. All through my childhood, all through my early adolescence, all I wanted to be was a doctor. Did you ever want to be a priest?
That's no. Thank you for asking.
With his wife Kathy laughing in the background. All right. So, when did you begin to realize we were in for a real roller coaster? About what time in this whole affair?
Maybe about 2 weeks before our spring break here in BC. We started seeing a lot more people coming in for routine testing, and the occasional fairly sick patient would come in. And so you could tell things were starting to ramp up, and we were on webinars and division meetings for emergency medicine and public health starting, in February. And so we were aware of what was happening in China for a good 2 months before spring break. But I think, like a lot of people, we weren't certain as to how truly impactful it would be locally, probably until about 2 weeks before spring break.
But you did sort of see it on the horizon, but not exactly how it would play out here.
Very much so. And, Kathy and I had planned our family spring break, as we have to usually, about half a year in advance. And so leading up to that, there was a lot of work for me and for Kathy. And you could see how things were changing in real time in regards to fairly sick people, both ones that you were seeing directly and ones that your colleagues were seeing. And emergency medicine is a very tight-knit community in British Columbia as a faculty. So there's a lot of talking and planning, and it was the first time for everyone to go through something of this level.
Did you, when things got scary, did you anticipate the compliance and the response of the general public that we have seen? Did you think that was going to be possible?
I was pleasantly surprised as to how compliant people have been. I'm a proud Canadian, so it reinforced my pride in fellow Canadians all across the country. I know that when we were actually on our spring break, when things were really starting to change half day by half day, that even the community, small community that we were in Tofino, things were changing quickly, and people were slowly taking things very seriously to the point where it changed our day-to-day existence even over there.
And how did it change your day-to-day existence in the emergency department?
How much time do you have? I mean, it's a very big answer. So there's the preparation before you come into the hospital and all the education that you have to do, and
before they come in the door.
Correct. So, but also as a physician, we're always having to stay on top of new developments, and this added quite an extra burden and responsibility for us to be knowledgeable and pay attention to truthful sources. And so our leadership has been very strong that way, both locally within Vancouver Coastal Health and also provincially, as I think a lot of us have experienced. When we came back from our truncated spring break, like everyone, so no complaints, what ended up happening with those of us who weren't scheduled to be on was that we were all expected to participate in simulation exercises with all of our team, from physicians to nurses, respiratory therapists, and allied health, so that we were the most prepared for patients with COVID or potential COVID. So there was a complete upheaval that was very detailed.
The amount of learning is something I hadn't even thought about when you speak of it. You're constantly absorbing new facts, new analyses, new predictions.
Yes, and even how I think after several years in the same specialty for many years, you develop muscle memory, and a lot of things become very routine, and it's more type 1 type of thinking and processing. And what it forced us all to do is to very much slow down and think about things and be much more purposeful. And the most routine things that we take for granted, like hand washing, became life-saving for both yourself and for your patients, but also with new equipment and new processes around things that we were very much used to doing. Placing people on life support became a potentially life-changing event for those of us placing the patient on life support. And as a frontline member of the team, there's a lot of responsibility, and it led to a lot of fatigue, for sure, both at work, but certainly, as Kathy and my kids will attest to, once you get home, there's a lot more fatigue that I wasn't as used to.
Do you think Kathy and the kids worry about you?
Yes, certainly in the first, I would say, 3 weeks after mid-March, there was more of an acute worry, seeing what was happening to our colleagues in Italy and in New York in particular, and with a lot of the frontline workers being affected there directly. There's a palpable fear that I think we all just tried to suppress a little bit, but it was there. And in regards to how Kathy and I communicated with the kids around not, ignoring the risks, but rather trying to do our best to comfort them that we are going to do our best to be protected, and that I'm not new at this job, which is good, and that we had a plan at home. And so things like that were new, showering at work, bagging your clothes at work, not bringing any of your clothes home at all. All of this were new processes and questions that were not normally asked, like, Dad, is it okay if I touch you? Or Kathy asking me if she could kiss me. And these were new touch points that we just naturally got used to. And I've just been amazed at how adaptable everyone's been.
Do you worry that now that, as someone said, we didn't just flatten the curve, we crushed it? Do you worry now that people may become a little too lax?
Absolutely, I do. And I'm hopeful that people are paying attention to what's happening internationally, where different locales, different countries are trying to relax restrictions. And we're seeing in certain places where outbreaks are popping up, whether it be Germany or South Korea, places with a lot of social compliance around public health that are similar to Canada. We are seeing outbreaks occur, and I'm hopeful that we're taking all of that seriously. So until we have a vaccine and we have something more definitive, it is a very difficult time ahead, for sure.
The virus seems to have some very unpredictable, strange aspects, affecting some people very little, others terribly, targeting the elderly, but randomly sometimes people of a much younger age. Did you encounter anything quite like it in your years of medical training or in your 15 years in the ER? Is it really as unique as it seems to us?
Completely unique. And, you know, I was my last year of one of my residencies during SARS, and we took SARS very seriously, but as you probably know, it didn't affect British Columbia that acutely. It was more around the Greater Toronto area. But having lived through that, and then H1N1, and then other outbreaks, there seemed to be a bit more predictability around who would be affected. And certainly initially here, trying to figure out who is actually at risk. Could you be contagious if you were not symptomatic? A lot of these things we are learning as we go. And so it's really encouraged me to become very open to reliable sources of information. And so it's a lot of reading, a lot of listening. You know, Kathy came in this morning, I'm listening to yet another rounds on the up-to-date science, and that's a personal responsibility that I have to take on. And it's just like being in school with the kids who are at home in different rooms doing their schoolwork.
Time off isn't exactly time off for you.
No, it's for, I'm sure, everyone, it's a strange time machine right now, and I'm very grateful for the environment we live in, the time of the year that it's occurred, so that we're able to be outside as much as possible, and our family already trends towards being outside as much as possible, so it's been quite nice. And I think for the first 4 weeks, Kathy and I got out and hiked one of our local trails nearly every morning, first thing, which is something we haven't had the luxury of doing in too many years.
Now, we're talking carefully about returning to the public celebration of Mass within our 50-person limit. And how to do this is very much on the Archbishop's mind. We're looking at all the necessary safeguards and so on. But would you have any advice for parishioners, especially elderly ones, when we do open up the church?
I think obviously we've all learned the importance of hand washing. And so if we could just start and finish at hand washing, I think that's the best thing as a measure. Encouraging people not to go to attend Mass if they're feeling even the slightest bit off is important. And I guess, may I ask you a question? What are you doing about communion? When I watch the preparation for communion, I don't know what the recommendations are around that, and I would think that that's obviously a very important part of a Catholic ceremony. So that's one concern.
We haven't got that far,
okay.
But the current thought is that if the priest extends the host at the length of his arm, and the communicant receives it at the length of his or her arms, it would provide at least a certain barrier of space between the two. That's sort of as far as we've got in our thinking. It's the thorny part of it. It's the thorny part of it.
Certainly.
We talked about the first Mass that we would have when the time came, and the Archbishop encouraged us to give priority to the people preparing for baptism. And I thought, great group. They don't go to communion.
Very true.
But they need to be baptized pretty soon,
yeah.
And then they'll go to communion. So it's not a long-term solution, but we're working on it. Any which way, we are so grateful to you for coming in and grateful for all you do.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
God bless you and your family.
Thank you.
Dave, I'm sure we could not have had a better first guest. Probably we will end up with a less quality production because you're number one, but it's been a first quality exchange, and we're really grateful for having you with us. Really appreciate it, and doubly so as a member of our own parish community, and we will keep praying for you. Kathy, will you just come and wave? I've known Kathy longer than I've known Dave. She comes from a family in Vancouver that's great big Catholic family that I know and have known for many years, and I'm really, really pleased that she's in the parish and that she was keeping an eye on both of us to make sure we didn't say anything that we shouldn't have today. So thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Monsignor.
Thanks.